Every night at midnight, Omega Ember heard the Alpha King's tortured howls, echoing through the Frostpine territory, raw cries that made her Omega instincts ache with an inexplicable need to comfort him. When she discovered the silver pendant on her doorstep and followed his calls to a hidden grave marked Elena Nightfall, beloved queen, she realized the powerful Alpha wasn't asserting dominance over his pack. He was calling to the dead, trapped in a grief so profound it transcended the veil between worlds. But what happens when an Omega's compassion collides with an Alpha's undying love for his lost mate? The scream that split the midnight air made Ember drop her teacup, hot liquid splashing across the wooden floor of her small cottage as she pressed both hands against her ears. But the sound wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from inside her own head, like someone was clawing at her brain from the inside out. This was the third night in a row. The same bone-deep howl that seemed to reach right into her chest and squeeze her heart until she couldn't breathe. Other people in the Frostpine Pack territory just rolled over and went back to sleep, claiming it was normal territorial behavior. But Ember knew better. She had always been different from the other Omegas. While they felt calm and sleepy around Alphas, she experienced everything 10 times stronger. Happy feelings hit her like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. Sad feelings crashed over her like tsunami waves. And this howling? It felt like drowning in someone else's anguish. Walking to her window, she wiped away the fog from her breath and stared into the forest that stretched out like a dark sea beyond her cottage. Somewhere out there, beyond the tall pine trees covered in snow, the Alpha King was making that terrible sound again. The moon hung in the sky like a broken plate, casting eerie shadows that made the trees look like skeletal fingers reaching toward the stars. Ember had lived in the Frostpine territory her whole life, but she had never seen Alpha King Darius up close. After her parents died in a hunting accident when she was 12, the pack elders decided she should live alone on the village edge. They said it was better that way. Omegas were supposed to stay quiet and help with domestic duties, not cause trouble with questions or opinions. But Ember was always causing trouble, even when she tried not to. Last month, she had confronted Beta Marcus's son when he was bullying a smaller child. The month before that, she had spoken up during a pack meeting when Elder William declared that Omegas shouldn't receive education past age 16. Everyone had stared at her like she had grown a second head. The howling came again, longer this time. It started low and deep, then climbed higher and higher until it sounded like the wind screaming through a crack in the mountains. Tears ran down Ember's face, though she didn't understand why she was crying. The sound was so full of raw pain that it made her stomach ache with sympathetic agony. She grabbed her heavy coat from the hook by the door. She couldn't take it anymore. 3 nights of this torture was enough. If the Alpha King wanted to wake the entire territory with his noise, then someone should tell him to stop. And if no one else was brave or foolish enough to do it, then she would. The snow crunched under her boots as she stepped outside into air so cold it bit at her nose and made her eyes water. But she kept walking toward the forest, driven by a compulsion she couldn't name. Her cottage was the last building before the tree line, which meant she was closest to wherever that awful sound originated. As she walked between the pine trees, Ember noticed something strange. The forest was too quiet. Usually at night, she could hear owls hooting and small animals rustling in the undergrowth. But tonight, everything was silent, except for that periodic howling. Even the wind had stopped blowing, as if the whole forest was holding its breath. The deeper she ventured into the trees, the stronger the feeling became. Her Omega senses were going haywire, picking up scents and sounds that didn't make sense. There was the smell of sadness, thick and heavy, like rain clouds before a storm. There was breathing that wasn't quite human, but wasn't quite wolf either. And underneath it all, something that made her heart race and her hands tremble with inexplicable recognition. After walking for about 20 minutes, she saw light flickering between the trees ahead. But as she got closer, She realized it wasn't fire at all. It was moonlight streaming down through a natural gap in the canopy into a small clearing. And in the middle of that clearing, she saw him. The Alpha King was nothing like the imposing figure from Pack Stories. Instead of standing tall and proud, he was on his knees in the snow, head thrown back toward the moon, mouth open wide as another howl poured from his throat. He remained in human form despite the frigid temperature, wearing only a white shirt and dark pants that should have left him frozen. Ember hid behind a large pine tree and watched in fascination. She had never seen an adult man cry before, but tears streamed down his face as he made that terrible sound. His hands were pressed flat against the ground, and his whole body shook with the force of his anguish. "Please," he whispered when the howl ended, his voice rough and broken, like he had been screaming for hours. "Please answer me. I know you can hear me." Ember frowned, looking around the clearing. Who was he talking to? There was no one else there, just the Alpha King, kneeling in the snow like he was praying to something she couldn't see. "I should have been there," he continued, still addressing the empty air. "I should have protected you. It's all my fault you're gone." A stick snapped under Ember's foot, the sound echoing through the quiet forest like a gunshot. The Alpha King's head whipped around so fast she thought his neck might break. His eyes locked onto hers, and she felt like prey caught in a predator's gaze. Those eyes weren't the golden color she had heard about in stories. They were gray like storm clouds, filled with so much pain that it made her chest hurt just to look at them. For a moment, neither moved. Then he slowly stood, brushing snow from his knees with careful dignity. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice different now, controlled and calm, like he was trying to pretend she hadn't just witnessed his breakdown. "It's dangerous for an Omega to be alone in the forest at night. More dangerous than listening to someone scream for 3 hours every night?" Ember stepped out from behind the tree, surprised by her own boldness. Her parents had always taught her to be respectful to alphas, especially important ones. But seeing him like this, broken and alone, made him seem less terrifying and more human. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or embarrassment. "The whole territory can hear. Every single person," she confirmed. "But they all pretend it's normal territorial behavior. They say you're just asserting dominance." He laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was bitter and sharp like breaking glass. "Territorial, right. Is that what they think? What else would they think?" Ember took a cautious step closer, though every Omega instinct screamed at her to flee. "You come out here every night and howl at the moon. What are people supposed to believe?" "They're supposed to mind their own business," he snapped, and for just a second, she saw a flash of the powerful Alpha King everyone described. His shoulders straightened, and his voice dropped to that commanding register. "And so are you, little Omega. Go home." "No." The word came out before she could stop it. His eyebrows shot up in genuine shock. "Excuse me?" "I said no." Ember's heart hammered so hard she was sure he could hear it, but she didn't back down. "You're keeping everyone awake. You're frightening the children. And you look like you haven't eaten or slept properly in weeks. Someone needs to tell you to stop. And apparently I'm the only one with enough backbone to do it." For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then, to her complete amazement, he smiled. It was a small, sad smile, but it was genuine. "Backbone," he repeated thoughtfully. "Or stupidity." "Maybe both," she admitted. "My name is Ember, Ember Thorn. I know who you are." He tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "You're the Omega who lives alone by the forest edge, the one who caused a stir at the pack meeting last month." Heat rushed to her cheeks. Of course he knew about that incident. The Alpha King probably knew everything that happened in his territory. "I wasn't causing a stir. I was asking legitimate questions about Omega rights." "About Omega education, specifically." He nodded, slowly. "Elder William wasn't pleased with your perspective. Elder William thinks Omegas should spend their entire lives cooking and cleaning, Ember said with more heat than she intended. But that doesn't make him right. The Alpha King Darius Nightfall, she remembered, took another step closer. He was much taller than her, and she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. This close, she could see dark circles under his eyes and hollowed cheeks that spoke of poor eating and sleeping habits. "You're not afraid of me," he observed. It wasn't a question. "Should I be? Most people are." Ember shrugged. "Most people haven't seen you crying alone in the snow." His face hardened again, like a door slamming shut. "You don't know anything about what you witnessed." "Then tell me." She crossed her arms over her chest, meeting his challenging stare. "Who were you talking to out here? And don't say no one, because I heard you clearly. You were asking someone to answer you." For a moment, she thought he might actually explain. His mouth opened slightly, and she saw something vulnerable flash across his features. But then he shook his head and stepped back. "Go home, Emberthorn," he said quietly. "This truly isn't your concern." "Everything that affects the pack is my concern," she shot back. "And a leader who's falling apart affects everyone under his protection." The words hung in the cold air between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Ember held her breath, waiting for him to get angry, to use his alpha voice and compel her to leave. Instead, he looked at her for a long time, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "You're not like other Omegas," he finally said. "No," she agreed simply. "I'm not." The silver pendant appeared on Ember's doorstep 3 nights later, gleaming like captured moonlight against the dark wood. No note, no explanation, just an ornate piece of jewelry that made her fingers tingle when she touched it. The moment she fastened the chain around her neck, she felt a pull unlike anything she'd ever experienced, drawing her toward the forest with invisible threads. The Alpha King's howls had grown more desperate each night since their encounter, filled with a longing that made her chest ache. Tonight felt different, charged with ancient magic that made the very air hum with power. Following the pendant's warm guidance, she found herself in parts of the forest she'd never seen before, where the trees grew in perfect circles and moonlight seemed brighter than it should be. A clearing opened before her that definitely shouldn't exist. She'd explored these woods since childhood, knew every trail and landmark. Yet here stood a perfect circle of towering standing stones that glowed with their own inner light. Each stone was carved with symbols she couldn't read, but somehow understood. Love, loss, remembrance, eternal bonds that transcended death itself. In the center sat a simple grave marker, and Ember's breath caught in her throat as she read the inscription. Elena Nightfall, beloved queen, devoted mother, the moon remembers what the earth cannot hold. Her legs gave out, sending her to her knees in the soft snow as understanding crashed over her like an avalanche. Everything clicked into place, the Alpha King's haunted eyes, his midnight wanderings, the way pack members grew uncomfortable whenever anyone mentioned his late mate's name. He wasn't howling at his pack during those midnight hours. He was calling to her, to Elena's spirit, wherever it might be. You found it. Ember spun toward the familiar voice, heart racing as King Darius emerged from behind the largest standing stone. In the mystical moonlight filtering through the grove, he looked younger somehow, the harsh lines of leadership softened by vulnerability she'd never witnessed before. The sacred grove, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena discovered this place shortly after we made it. She said the stones held the memories of every love story that refused to end with death itself. How long? Ember asked, the pendant growing warmer against her skin with each word. 2 years, 3 months, 16 days. The exact count fell from his lips like a prayer worn smooth by endless repetition. She died saving a group of Omega children from a forest fire. A burning tree was about to crush them, and she threw herself between them and death. His laugh held no humor whatsoever. I was 3 territories away, negotiating some meaningless border dispute while my mate died being the hero she always was. Ember rose slowly, every instinct urging her to comfort this broken alpha, despite pack law and social conventions. The pendant, why give it to me? Because you're the only one who doesn't look at me with pity or disgust. The only one brave enough to tell me my grief disturbs the pack. He stepped closer, and she caught his scent pine smoke and winter storms, but underneath, something raw and honest that made her omega senses sing. Elena wore that pendant on our mating day. Her grandmother claimed it would glow brightest when worn by someone with a heart capable of true loyalty. Looking down, Ember gasped. The moonstone blazed against her throat like captured starlight, pulsing with silver fire that seemed to respond to her heartbeat. But I barely know you, she whispered. Loyalty isn't about time, little Omega. It's about choice. His fingers hovered near her face, not quite touching, but close enough that she could feel warmth radiating from his skin. You chose to listen when everyone else chose to judge. You chose to seek truth instead of accepting comfortable lies. Elena would have done exactly the same thing. A terrible thought struck her. The other alphas, there's talk in the village. Some think you're losing your mind with grief. They speak of challenges, of someone stronger taking your place as king. Let them come. His voice carried the weight of a man who had already lost everything that truly mattered to him. At least then Elena won't have to watch me fail as a leader the way I failed as her protector. No. The word exploded from Ember with shocking force, surprising them both. You don't get to give up. Not when your pack needs you. Not when those Omega children Elena saved are depending on your continued protection. For a moment, the Alpha King stared at her in stunned silence. Then something shifted in his expression, surprise, giving way to something that might have been hope. You speak as if you care what happens to a grieving Alpha. I care what happens to good leaders who put others before themselves. I care what happens to someone who loves so deeply that death itself can't break the bond. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly, despite every Omega instinct screaming at her to submit. And I care that Elena Nightfall's sacrifice means something more than just another reason for you to hate yourself. The clearing fell silent except for the whisper of wind through the ancient stones. Then, from somewhere in the distance, came the sound of urgent howls, not the Alpha King's midnight calls, but pack signals, multiple voices, alarmed and calling for assembly. Trouble, Darius said, his alpha instincts snapping back into sharp focus. Border patrol signals. They ran through the forest together, the sacred grove disappearing behind them like something from a dream. But the pendant still burned against Ember's chest, and she knew with absolute certainty, whatever was coming, whatever threatened their pack, she would stand beside this broken king and help him remember what it meant to lead with love instead of loss. The howls grew closer and more urgent, carrying with them the scent of foreign wolves. The Silvermoon pack, their aggressive neighbors to the east, known for their ruthless ambition and their belief that might made right. As they burst from the tree line into the main village, Ember realized their quiet moment of understanding was over. The real test of everything they discovered was about to begin. War drums echoed across the Frostpine territory as dawn broke bloody red through winter clouds, and Ember knew their world was about to shatter like thin ice under pressure. The Silvermoon pack had arrived in overwhelming force, 30 wolves arranged in perfect formation outside the village borders, with their Alpha Marcus standing at their head like a golden god of conquest. King Darius Nightfall, Marcus called, his voice carrying easily across the tense distance. I challenge your right to rule under the ancient laws. A leader who speaks to shadows and neglects his living pack has forfeited any claim to the throne. Ember's blood turned to ice water in her veins. Beside her, Darius straightened to his full imposing height, every inch the Alpha King despite the exhaustion shadowing his features. The pendant at her throat pulsed with sudden warmth, as if Elena's spirit was trying to lend them strength for what was coming. Careful, Omega. Elder Matthias appeared at her elbow, his weathered face grim with concern and fear. That pendant marks you as his weakness now. If our king falls to the Silver Moons, Every Omega in this territory becomes a prize of war. The words hit her like physical blows. Around the village square, she could see other Omegas gathering their children, preparing to flee if the challenge went badly. These weren't just politics anymore. These were lives hanging in the balance. Futures that would be decided by the outcome of single combat. "I accept your challenge, Marcus Silvermoon." Darius's voice rang out clear and strong, carrying the authority of absolute rule. "But under the ancient laws, I demand the right to set terms. No matter who emerges victorious, no harm comes to any Omega, elder, or child in my territory. They remain under my protection, and that protection doesn't end with my potential defeat." Marcus laughed, the sound sharp and cold as breaking glass, spoken like a king who's already planning to lose. "Very well, I agree to your terms, though it hardly matters." The Silvermoon Pack knows how to treat conquered territories with appropriate respect. Ember's enhanced Omega senses could detect the lie radiating from him like heat from a forge. Whatever Marcus planned for their people if he won, it wouldn't involve respect or protection. It would be subjugation wrapped in diplomatic language. "When do we settle this?" Darius asked with deadly calm. "Sunset. The traditional time for challenges that decide the fate of entire territories." Marcus smiled, revealing too many teeth in an expression that held no warmth. "I suggest you spend the day saying farewell to your pack, Nightfall. They deserve to know what kind of leader they're about to lose." As the Silvermoons withdrew to establish their camp, Ember found herself surrounded by pack members desperate for answers and reassurance. Beta Caroline grabbed her arm with trembling fingers. "Is it true what they're saying? That the king has lost his mind, talking to his dead mate?" "He's grieving," Ember said firmly, though her voice shook slightly. "That's not the same as madness." "Grief can make alphas unpredictable," muttered Thomas, one of the younger betas, whose ambition had always exceeded his wisdom. "Maybe it's time for new leadership. The Silvermoons are strong, united, focused on expansion." "The Silvermoons are conquerors," Ember snapped, surprising herself with the force of her anger. "They don't build schools or medical centers for their people. They don't give Omega's voices in pack decisions. They take what they want and call it strength, but it's really just organized bullying." But she could see doubt creeping into too many faces around her. Fear made people willing to trade freedom for promises of safety, even when those promises came from wolves known for breaking their word whenever convenient. By midday, nearly half the pack had gathered in the village square to hear Marcus speak about his vision for their future. His words were honey poured over poison promises of prosperity and security, a return to traditional pack values where everyone knew their place and stayed in it. "Your current alpha wastes precious time howling at the moon when he should be expanding territory, forming strategic alliances, making your pack feared and respected throughout the northern territories," Marcus declared to growing applause. "Under my leadership, the Frostpine pack will become part of something greater, part of an empire that stretches from coast to coast." Ember felt physically sick listening to the cheers from pack members who should have known better. But she also noticed who wasn't applauding the Omegas. Marcus barely acknowledged the elderly wolves he dismissed with casual contempt, the families with young children who remembered Elena's ultimate sacrifice. She found Darius alone in his study, staring at a painted portrait of his late mate. In the image, Elena's eyes sparkled with life and mischief, her smile bright enough to illuminate the darkest winter night. "She was beautiful," Ember said softly, settling into the chair across from his desk, "inside and out. She used to say that a true leader's strength came from how well they protected their weakest members, not how fiercely they could conquer their enemies." He touched the painted face with gentle fingers, as if trying to memorize every detail. "I've been so lost in missing her that I forgot how to lead the way she would have wanted." "It's not too late," Ember said, though her heart was breaking for what she was about to suggest. "You could still win this challenge. You're older, more experienced in actual combat." "And half dead inside," he interrupted with bitter honesty. "Marcus is younger, faster, hungrier for victory. He hasn't spent 2 years letting grief eat him alive from the inside out. The pack knows it. He knows it. And so do I. Ember stared at him in growing horror. You're not even going to try? You're planning to let him win? I'm going to fight with everything I have left, he said quietly. But his tone suggested it wouldn't be nearly enough. But I'm not naive enough to think it will be sufficient. My duty now is to ensure our people have the best possible chance under new leadership. The terms I negotiated will protect them, at least initially. No. The word tore from her throat like a battle cry. You don't get to give up. Not now. Not when I finally understand why Elena fell in love with you in the first place. He turned to stare at her, something dangerous flickering in his storm-gray eyes. Fight for her memory, Ember whispered fiercely, stepping closer to his desk. Fight for the children she died to save. Fight for the pack that still needs the kind of leader who puts protection over conquest. Fight for the future she would have wanted to see built on the foundation of her sacrifice. For a moment, she thought she saw a spark of the alpha Elena had chosen as her mate. Then it flickered and died, leaving only a tired, broken man who had already accepted his fate. Prepare the pack for transition, Ember. That's a direct order from your Alpha King while I still hold the title. As sunset approached with ominous inevitability, Ember stood with the rest of the pack around the ancient challenge circle, the pendant burning like guilt and determination against her chest. She had found the truth behind the midnight howls, had seen the man beneath the grief, but it might already be too late to save either of them. The ceremonial drums began their steady beat, calling the fighters to face whatever destiny awaited them both. The challenge circle had been marked with ancient symbols older than written history, sacred ground where pack leadership had been decided for countless generations. Ember stood with the gathered witnesses as both alphas prepared for combat that would determine the fate of everyone she'd ever cared about. Marcus Silvermoon stripped off his shirt with theatrical confidence, revealing a body honed for war. Scars marked his chest and arms trophies from previous victories that he wore like medals of honor. He shifted into his wolf form with predatory grace, emerging as a magnificent silver-gray beast with yellow eyes that gleamed with hunger for power. Darius transformed with less fanfare but equal skill, his wolf emerging larger and darker than his opponent's. Where Marcus's wolf looked like polished silver, Darius appeared carved from midnight shadows, battle-tested and weathered by years of protecting his territory against all threats. The fight began with careful circling, each wolf testing the other's speed and reactions. But Ember could see what the crowd couldn't. Darius wasn't fighting to win. Every move was defensive. Every counterattack pulled just short of delivering real damage. He was planning to make it look convincing while accepting defeat. She couldn't let it happen. Stop! The word tore from her throat before conscious thought could intervene. This isn't a real challenge, it's assisted suicide. Both wolves froze mid-attack as her voice carried across the circle. By ancient law, no one could harm an Omega during formal combat without forfeiting all claims to leadership. So her intervention was both legal and binding. You want to know if your alpha is fit to rule? Ember turned to address the crowd directly, her heart hammering but her voice growing stronger with each word. Look around you. Look at the schools he built after the fire that killed his mate, ensuring no child would ever be trapped again. Look at the new medical center, the roads connecting our territory to trading partners, the way every pack member gets representation in important decisions. Marcus shifted back to human form, his expression dangerous. Pretty speeches, little Omega, but a broken alpha is still broken. What happens when his grief turns to rage? When he can't make hard choices because he's too busy communing with ghosts? Elena Nightfall died saving Omega children. Ember shot back, feeling the pendant pulse with sudden warmth against her skin. She sacrificed herself because she believed the pack's future was worth more than her own life. And every night since then, your broken alpha has called to her spirit not from madness, but from love so profound it transcends the barrier between life and death. That's not weakness, that's loyalty beyond anything most wolves will ever comprehend. The crowd was listening now, really listening instead of just waiting for violence. Ember pressed her advantage while she had it. You want to follow Marcus Silvermoon? That's your choice. But understand this, he challenges grieving widows instead of protecting them. He calls love madness and loyalty weakness. What happens when you lose someone you care about? Will he show you the same compassion he's demonstrating toward your current alpha? Elder Matthias stepped forward, his weathered face thoughtful. The Omega speaks wisdom that comes from the heart. Perhaps we've been too hasty in judging our alpha's methods of honoring the dead. Other voices joined in, pack members sharing memories of Darius's fair leadership, his protection of the vulnerable, his willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for others' well-being. The tide of opinion was turning, but Marcus wasn't finished. This changes nothing, he snarled, beginning to shift back to wolf form. Sentiment doesn't make leaders. I'll finish this challenge and demonstrate my point with action instead of words. But as his bones began to crack and reshape, something extraordinary happened. Darius shifted back to human form and spoke a single word that stopped everyone cold. Accepted. The Alpha King stood naked and unashamed in the center of the circle, his storm-gray eyes fixed on Marcus's half-transformed figure. I accept your judgment of my recent leadership, but I also accept something else that my pack deserves better than a leader who's abandoned hope. Effective immediately, I name Ember Thorn as my chosen advisor and voice of the Omega population. Any future challenges to my authority will be answered by both of us. Together, the crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Never in pack history had an Alpha shared power with an Omega, especially during a formal challenge. But as Ember stepped forward to stand beside Darius, the moonstone pendant blazed with silver fire that could be seen by everyone present. Marcus, caught mid-transformation and off balance, stumbled and fell. The symbolic meaning was clear to everyone watching. Even the spirits of the land recognized the rightness of this unprecedented union. Elder Matthias raised his ceremonial staff, calling for the ancient vote of confidence that would settle the matter once and for all. All those who support Alpha King Darius Nightfall and Advisor Ember Thorn in their joint leadership, make your choice known to the assembled witnesses. The howls that rose in response echoed across 3 territories, a symphony of approval that would be remembered and retold for generations to come. Marcus Silvermoon's defeat should have ended the challenge, but Ember could smell his rage and humiliation poisoning the air around the sacred circle. A wolf like Marcus didn't accept failure gracefully. He looked for ways to turn defeat into delayed victory. You think this changes anything, Nightfall? He snarled, finally completing his shift back to human form. You think making an Omega, your advisor, somehow proves your fitness to lead? I think it proves I'm willing to listen to wisdom wherever it comes from, Darius replied calmly, though Ember could sense the tension coiled in his muscles. Something you might consider before your next territorial expansion. Wisdom? Marcus laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. Let's see how wise your pet Omega really is. Before anyone could react, he lunged not at Darius but at Ember herself, claws extending from partially shifted hands. The attack violated every law of challenge combat, but Marcus was clearly beyond caring about traditional rules. The pendant around Ember's neck erupted with blazing silver light as ancient protective magic responded to mortal danger. But it was Darius who moved like liquid lightning, intercepting Marcus mid-leap and sending both of them crashing to the ground in a tangle of snarling fury. This time, there was no holding back. Darius fought with the desperate ferocity of a mate protecting his chosen partner, every move calculated to end the threat permanently. When Marcus shifted to full wolf form in a last desperate gambit, Darius met him halfway, and the resulting battle was swift and decisive. It ended with Marcus on his back, Darius's jaws locked around his throat in the traditional position of submission or death. For a long moment, everyone held their breath, waiting to see if mercy or justice would prevail. Yield! Darius growled through his wolf throat, the words distorted but perfectly understandable. "I yield," Marcus gasped, his submission witnessed by representatives from 5 different territories. When Darius shifted back to human form, he was breathing hard but triumphant in a way Ember had never seen before. This wasn't the broken man she'd found howling at graves. This was the Alpha King, who had earned his crown through strength tempered by wisdom. "Take your pack and go," he told Marcus with quiet authority. "You're no longer welcome in Frostpine territory." But Marcus, he waited until the defeated Alpha met his eyes. "If you ever threaten an Omega under my protection again, submission won't be an option." As the Silver Moon Pack withdrew in shame and defeat, the gathered witnesses began to disperse, buzzing with excitement about what they'd witnessed. But Elder Matthias lingered, his ancient eyes thoughtful as he approached Darius and Ember. "That pendant," he said quietly, nodding toward the moonstone that still glowed softly against her throat. "I haven't seen its like for many decades. Where did you acquire such a thing?" "It was a gift," Ember replied carefully, unsure how much to reveal about the sacred grove and Elena's continuing presence. "From the dead to the living," Matthias murmured, his weathered face creasing with something that might have been awe. "The old magic stirs again in our territory. Perhaps that's not entirely coincidental." After the elder walked away, Ember found herself alone with Darius for the first time since their world had turned upside down. The challenge circle was empty now, except for them, moonlight casting silver patterns on the ancient stones. "I meant what I said about the advisor position," he told her quietly. "This pack needs your voice, your perspective, your courage. Will you accept?" Ember thought about her small cottage, her carefully maintained distance from pack politics, her quiet life on the margins of society. Then she thought about Elena's grave, about howls that carried love across impossible distances, about the way this grieving Alpha had chosen to fight for hope instead of surrendering to despair. "I'll do it," she said, and watched relief transform his features. "But I have conditions." His eyebrows rose in amused surprise. "I'm listening. First, you don't stop visiting Elena's grave. Love like that shouldn't be hidden or forgotten. It should be honored and celebrated." He nodded, emotion flickering across his face like candlelight. "Second, we establish an Omega Council with real authority to make decisions about pack welfare, not just advisory roles that get ignored when inconvenient." "Agreed, without reservation." "And third," she hesitated, then pushed forward with the courage that had carried her into the challenge circle. "You teach me to howl properly. Not the desperate calls you've been making, but the songs of remembrance that honor the dead while strengthening the living." That surprised him more than anything else she could have said. "Why?" "Because sometimes the only way to heal grief is to share it. Elena deserves to hear love from more voices than just yours. And maybe if we howl together, it won't hurt quite so much for either of us." For the first time since she'd known him, Darius smiled with genuine joy instead of polite courtesy, the expression of a man who'd found an unexpected gift in the middle of his darkest hour. "I'd be honored to teach you," he said softly. "Elena would have loved your idea." Above them, the moon smiled down on a pack that was learning to balance tradition with innovation, strength with compassion, leadership with service. The real work was just beginning, but they would face it together. 3 months later, the sound of shared howling had become as natural as the evening wind through pine trees. Every night at sunset, voices rose from across the Frostpine territory, not the desperate cries of one broken Alpha, but a chorus of remembrance that honored Elena's memory while strengthening the bonds between pack members. Ember stood on the balcony of the Alpha's residence, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and amber. The Omega Council had met that afternoon, and their latest initiative, a scholarship program for young wolves regardless of their secondary gender, had been unanimously approved by the pack assembly. "Productive day?" Darius asked, joining her with 2 steaming cups of pine needle tea, their evening ritual that had evolved naturally over the months. "Very," she replied, accepting the warm cup gratefully. The scholarship applications exceeded our expectations by nearly 300%. It seems Elena's legacy is inspiring a whole generation to pursue education beyond traditional pack roles. Darius smiled, the expression no longer shadowed by consuming grief, but warmed by genuine pride and purpose. She always believed that knowledge was the greatest gift we could give our young ones. I think she'd be amazed by what you've accomplished in her name. The changes in both of them over the past months had been remarkable to witness. Darius had regained weight and energy, throwing himself into leadership with renewed vigor and clear vision. The midnight howling had evolved from desperate calls into structured songs of remembrance that the entire pack could join, transforming individual sorrow into communal healing. Ember had grown into her role as advisor with natural grace, her voice carrying weight in council meetings and her innovative ideas shaping policy with increasing influence. The delegation from the Eastern Territories arrives tomorrow, she reminded him, reviewing the mental checklist of preparations. They're specifically interested in how we've successfully integrated Omega perspectives into pack governance without destabilizing traditional authority structures. Let them see what happens when you give brilliant people the chance to contribute their talents, Darius replied with conviction. Your council has produced more innovative solutions in 3 months than my previous advisors managed in 3 years of conventional thinking. As if summoned by their conversation, voices began to rise from across the territory, the evening howl that had become their signature tradition. But tonight, something was different. Instead of their usual song of remembrance for the departed, the pack was singing something entirely new. Do you hear that? Ember asked, tilting her head to catch the unfamiliar melody drifting on the cool air. Darius listened intently, his enhanced alpha hearing picking up nuances and harmonies she might miss. It's a mating song, he said softly, wonder coloring his voice. Someone in the pack has found their true mate. They stood together in comfortable silence, listening to the joyful celebration echoing through the forest. The sound spoke of new beginnings, of love discovered and futures bright with infinite possibility. It was exactly the kind of hope Elena had died protecting. Darius, Ember said quietly, setting down her cup with careful precision, can I ask you something deeply personal? Always, he replied without hesitation. Do you think Elena would approve of what we've built together? This partnership we've created? The changes we've implemented? He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the gravity it deserved. I think she would be proud that her death led to something constructive instead of destructive. I think she would love seeing Omegas empowered and educated, their voices heard in decisions that affect their lives. And I think, he paused, choosing his words with careful honesty, I think she would be grateful that her sacrifice helped me learn how to lead with love instead of fear, with hope instead of despair. The pendant around Ember's neck pulsed once with gentle warmth, as if Elena's spirit was offering her own quiet approval from whatever realm she now inhabited. There's something else, Darius continued, his voice growing more certain with each word. I've been thinking seriously about succession planning. Not because I'm going anywhere, he added quickly, seeing her alarmed expression, but because good leaders prepare for the future and ensure continuity. What did you have in mind? I want to formalize your position, not just as advisor, but as co-ruler with equal authority, equal responsibility, and equal say in all major decisions. His gray eyes held hers steadily, completely serious. The pack respects you, trusts your judgment implicitly, and benefits enormously from your perspective. It's time our governmental structure reflected that reality. Ember stared at him in shock, her mind reeling. Co-ruler? But I'm an Omega. There's no precedent in pack history. Then we'll create one, he said simply, as if revolutionizing centuries of tradition was a minor administrative detail. Elena always said that traditions should serve the people, not the other way around. If our current traditions don't allow for capable leaders, regardless of their secondary gender, then it's time to evolve those traditions. Before Ember could formulate a response, A commotion erupted from the village square below. Excited voices, running footsteps, and the kind of celebratory howling that announced major news throughout the territory. "What do you think?" Ember began. But she was interrupted by Beta Caroline bursting onto the balcony with tears of joy streaming down her face. "The Eastern Territories just sent urgent word," Caroline gasped, still trying to catch her breath from her sprint up the stairs. "3 more packs have officially requested to join our alliance. They want to implement our educational and governmental reforms in their own territories." Darius and Ember exchanged stunned looks. When they'd started this journey, their goals had been simple: heal one grieving alpha and give voice to silenced pack members. Now their innovations were spreading across the continent like beneficial wildfire. "There's more," Caroline continued, practically bouncing with excitement. "The Continental Pack Council wants to invite you both to address their annual summit. They're calling your partnership the Frostpine model and discussing it seriously as a template for modern pack governance." After Caroline left to spread the momentous news further, Darius and Ember remained on the balcony as full darkness settled over their thriving territory. The evening howl had evolved into an impromptu celebration, voices raised in joy and hope instead of grief and loss. "Elena would be proud," Ember said softly, echoing his earlier words with deep conviction. "Yes," Darius agreed, his voice warm with certainty and peace. "She would be." 1 year later, the Frostpine territory had been transformed beyond recognition into a beacon of progressive pack governance. The village square bustled with unprecedented activity as pack members and distinguished visitors from across the continent mingled during the first annual Elena Nightfall Memorial Festival, a celebration of education, innovation, and the transformative power of love to create positive change. Ember stood before the newly unveiled statue in the center of the square, reading aloud the inscription that she and Darius had crafted together with months of careful consideration. "Elena Nightfall, Queen, Mother, Teacher, Hero." Her sacrifice sparked a revolution of the heart that continues to light our way forward. The bronze figure depicted Elena exactly as she had lived, not as a distant, untouchable royal figure, but as a beloved teacher surrounded by children of all ages and secondary genders, her hands extended in welcome and her expression bright with the joy of sharing knowledge. It was precisely how Darius remembered her, and exactly how the pack would remember her forever. "Beautiful ceremony," said Alpha Patricia Greenvale, one of 6 distinguished pack leaders who had traveled here to sign formal alliance agreements based on the revolutionary Frostpine model. "My Omega Council is already eager to begin implementing similar reforms in our territory. The preliminary studies suggest remarkable improvements in pack satisfaction and productivity. The key is patience and persistence," Ember replied, having learned this crucial lesson through months of careful, sometimes frustrating progress. Change takes time, especially when you're challenging traditions that have existed for centuries. But it's absolutely worth the effort when you see the tangible results in people's lives around them. The festival continued with music, food, and demonstrations of the various educational programs that had become their signature innovation. Young wolves, who might once have been severely limited by their secondary gender, were now displaying sophisticated artwork, presenting original scientific research, and performing musical compositions that spoke to the breadth of talent being nurtured under their revolutionary new system. Advisor Ember called a familiar voice that made her tense instinctively. She turned to see Marcus Silvermoon approaching with what appeared to be genuine humility, a dramatic change from his previous arrogance. His pack's decisive defeat the previous year had led to considerable soul-searching, and recent reports suggested he was implementing his own series of meaningful reforms. "Might I have a word?" Marcus asked respectfully. "Of course," she replied cautiously, though Darius appeared at her side almost instantly, his protective instinct still finely tuned where she was concerned. "I wanted to apologize," Marcus said simply, his pride clearly costing him considerable effort. "Not just for the challenge and my behavior during it, but for my entire attitude toward Omegas in general. Watching what you've accomplished here has forced me to confront some deeply uncomfortable truths about my own prejudices and assumptions. Apology accepted, Ember said graciously, sensing his sincerity. Meaningful change is possible for anyone willing to do the hard work of examining their beliefs. Indeed it is. Marcus nodded toward his own delegation, which notably included several Omegas in positions of obvious authority and respect. My Pack Council now includes 3 Omega voices with full voting rights, and our educational system has been completely restructured along your model. We're calling it the New Dawn Initiative. After Marcus moved on to other conversations, clearly changed by his experiences, Darius slipped his arm around Ember's waist in a gesture that had become natural over the months of their deepening partnership. "Still hard to believe sometimes," he murmured against her ear, his breath warm and comforting, that something so beautiful and transformative could grow from so much pain and loss. Elena's pain wasn't wasted, Ember replied with quiet conviction, leaning into his familiar warmth. It became the foundation for all of this progress. Their relationship had evolved gradually, from professional partnership to something deeper and infinitely more complex. Not romantic in the traditional passionate sense, both understood that Elena would always hold a special, irreplaceable place in Darius's heart, but a profound bond based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection that had surprised them both with its steady strength and resilience. Alpha Nightfall, Advisor Thorn, Elder Matthias approached with the measured pace of his advanced years. The Continental Pack Council representatives are ready for the ceremonial signing. They made their way to the main platform, where 6 different alliance agreements waited to be formalized. Each document represented months of delicate negotiation and careful compromise, but also the promise of a new era of unprecedented cooperation between packs that had previously viewed each other as territorial rivals. As Ember signed her name alongside Darius's on each historic agreement, she thought about the remarkable journey that had brought them to this transformative moment. A year ago, she had been a lonely Omega living on society's edge, and he had been a broken Alpha howling his grief to an empty forest. Now they stood as acknowledged equals before representatives from across the continent, their partnership a powerful symbol of what could be achieved when people chose hope over fear. "The final item on our agenda," Darius announced to the gathered crowd, his voice carrying clearly across the festival grounds, "is a deeply personal one." Ember looked at him in surprise. This definitely wasn't part of their carefully planned program, but his smile was warm and reassuring, radiating love and certainty, so she waited with growing anticipation to see what he had in mind. A year ago, a remarkably brave Omega chose to confront a grieving Alpha in his darkest hour, he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute truth. "She challenged me to honor Elena's memory through constructive action rather than endless, destructive sorrow. Today, I want to make something official that has been growing in my heart for months." He knelt beside her, right there in front of hundreds of witnesses, and withdrew a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. Ember's heart stopped as she realized what was happening, what he was asking. "Ember Thorn," he said, his voice steady despite the powerful emotion shining in his storm gray eyes. "You have been my partner in leadership, my equal in authority, and my closest friend through this incredible transformation. Will you also be my mate and co-ruler for whatever challenges and joys lie ahead of us?" The ring inside the box was simple but absolutely perfect, a luminous moonstone surrounded by small diamonds, crafted to complement rather than replace the pendant she still wore in Elena's honor. As she looked down at it, she felt Elena's presence like a gentle blessing, as if the former queen was offering her wholehearted approval of this new chapter. "Yes," Ember said, her voice breaking with overwhelming happiness. "Yes. Of course. Always yes." As Darius slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her amid thunderous applause from the crowd, Ember felt the pendant around her neck pulse with warm light one final time. Then, gradually, the supernatural glow faded to a gentle, peaceful gleam, not disappearing entirely, but settling into contented rest. Elena's love story with Darius would always be an integral part of their shared history, honored and remembered. But now a new love story was beginning, one built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the deep understanding that the strongest bonds weren't always formed in moments of burning passion, but in the quiet, daily choice to stand together through whatever life might bring. That night, as the festival wound down and visitors began their journeys home carrying news of what they'd witnessed, Darius and Ember walked hand in hand to the sacred grove where everything had begun. The standing stones still glowed with their gentle inner light, and Elena's grave was covered with flowers left by grateful pack members throughout the day. "Thank you," Darius said softly, addressing the simple headstone with genuine gratitude, "for saving those children, for teaching me about selfless love, and for somehow sending me exactly the partner I needed to build something truly worthy of your sacrifice." Ember added her own quiet words of gratitude. Then they stood together in comfortable silence as the full moon rose above the ancient stones. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear the evening howl, beginning no longer a sound of grief and despair, but a celebration of community, continuity, and boundless hope for the future. Their pack was whole and thriving. The dead were honored with living memorials. The living were flourishing under just leadership. And somewhere between midnight howls and morning councils, between shared grief and renewed hope, they had discovered that the strongest kind of love wasn't always the desperate passion of first sight, but the steady, conscious choice to build something beautiful together, one day at a time. The Frostpine territory settled into peaceful sleep that night, secure in the knowledge that their leaders governed with wisdom gained through sorrow, strength tempered by compassion, and love that honored the past, while embracing the future with open arms.